Welcome back to our thought for the day. It's good to have you back with us. We've just celebrated the Easter weekend. Christians around the globe have got out of bed, they've opened their windows and their doors, and they've declared loudly, Jesus is alive. Our church did just that at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. It's a day of great celebration as Christians, as we really celebrate and revel in the joy and the majesty of God's Son, Jesus the Christ, who was nailed to a cross, buried, who rose from the grave. This weekend is significant for another one. We, as a nation, have lost 10,000 people to the coronavirus. And that is a tragic and significant milestone. But it's poignant that it should happen over the Easter weekend. The Easter weekend, we have come as a nation face to face with death and our own mortality. But the Easter weekend is also the time when we come face to face with the death and resurrection of God's Son, and face to face with his immortality. And there's great comfort that we can take from what happened over the Easter weekend and from Jesus' words and actions in the face of death. I've been reminded, just thinking of this afternoon and what I might say, I've been reminded of the words of John chapter 11. Jesus' friend Lazarus had died, and Jesus goes to that town to comfort the sisters and to raise him from the dead, we know from reading the story, but no one knew that at the time. And as he enters the village, he's met by Martha, one of Lazarus' two sisters, and this is what he says there. This is the conversation that takes place. She goes to him and she says, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Jesus says, your brother will rise again. And Martha says, I know he will rise in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus says these famous words, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? You see, Jesus' whole mission when he came to this earth was to come and stand in the gap, was to come and be like us, 100% fully God yet fully man. He came to live our life, face our temptations and our pains and our worries, yet without sin, the Bible says. Jesus came to deal with our past and our present and our future concerns. He came to deal with death and darkness and even the grave. The Bible says that the fear of death, the slavery that comes from the fear of death, is defeated by Jesus' death and resurrection. And on that Easter Sunday morning, when he arose victorious from the grave, he showed us that it's possible to have a hope that is bigger than anything else. And yet what I find interesting about what happened after Jesus' resurrection is the disciples' response to Jesus. In the book of Acts, in chapter 1, verses 6 to 7, we read, we'll come to those verses in a moment, but we read in that chapter how the disciples spent 40 days with Jesus. Can you imagine spending 40 days with Jesus after his resurrection? To look at him on a daily basis and see that glorified body, to see the risen Jesus, the marks of the cross, yet somehow telling a different story, a story of victory. They spent 40 days with him preparing them for the future. I find it really interesting that in verses 6 and 7, they ask a question about what comes next. Is he going to bring the kingdom to Israel? Is this the time when the end, the day of the Lord happens? And it's really interesting that they still had questions about what was to come. And we probably, especially in light of those numbers I've just said, will have questions about what tomorrow may bring, what next month may bring, or even 2 or 3 months down the line. But I find Jesus' response really interesting. As they ask that question, he says to them, it's not for you to know the times and seasons. It's not for you to know what comes next. However, you will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth. And for me, what the thought that really hits me going into a week after celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, it isn't for us to be too worried and to think too much about what tomorrow may bring, to worry about when this might end. Our job is far more important than that. Our job as Christians is to be witnesses to the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. To speak to the world of a hope that stands in the face of worry and fear and concern. Those numbers may tragically go up. And people need to know not when that will end, but how they can live now and survive the coming days. Jesus is the hope of the world, the light of the world, and we, his people, are witnesses to his resurrection, and we should and must tell people about him. God bless you, have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.